We go to one of the most famous and iconic tracks of our F1 calendar year here in the Japanese Grand Prix. From iconic moments to a track layout that every Formula One driver enjoys, this is one of those special circuits that really brings it all for our Formula One calendar. The history on this track is second to none. From Michael Schumacher winning his first title in Ferrari in 2000 and having his domination reign in the Ferrari car, to also losing it in 06 to Fernando Alonso, which also brings up the notorious moment of Fernando overtaking Schumacher in 130R, which in that time period with those cars and that layout was a ridiculous feat. Nowadays, the cars are a lot more laid out. That actually used to be not a flat out part of the circuit. We had Nigel Mansell in 1991 trying to win a championship for the Williams, but crashing out on lap 10, and Senna ended up winning his third title there in Suzuka. When you talk about Suzuka, Senna is always a name that's going to reign very high there. Whether it's through controversy or winning championships, the notorious crash that also happened in 1989, that everybody should know about if you're a Formula One fan, with Senna and Prost. Senna had to end up winning this race, and Prost was pretty much going for an overtake, and you know what happens there. Crash into each other, Prost had to retire, Senna goes on to finish first, but was later disqualified for cutting a chicane. But a moment for the Japanese people that they'll probably never forget was Kamui Kobayashi, one of my favorite drivers of all time, getting a F1 podium. In a car that probably wasn't deserving of being on a podium spot, but this guy was a madman when it came to overtakes and truly gave it his all from every single race on the calendar. The history here is second to none. As I've said, this track is in the heart of all Formula One fans and all Formula One drivers. Sebastian Vettel, who's now retired, always talked about this track being the best, also saying that the fans were insane fans, very dedicated to the sport in a good way, and just genuinely loving of the sport coming to Japan and providing the race that it is. The layout provides so many ways to just enjoy it from a bunch of different views. There's also a big chance of rain coming even in this weekend, and that always brings up a little bit of a stir in our Formula One races. The first sector is just beautiful. Let's go over the preview on the track. As for tires, we're going to go from C1 to C3. Now, these are the hardest tires we have in the calendar year, and this track definitely needs it because of the traction and how badly the tires get hit going into big corners like Spoon, even all of Sector 1 and 130R. Those are all corners where the tires are getting burnt up quite a bit because of the high speed, and it's, if not, one of the most tire stressful tracks on the grid. The downforce you need is pretty high. It doesn't have too many overtaking zones. The ones that are good overtaking zones are hard to get. Because of the high downforce and it only being one DRS zone, overtakes are far and few, but they can be genuine beauties. And if it's changeable conditions, you can find a couple of overtaking zones that can be very interesting throughout the track that you will see when we go into our track preview. The tire strategy should be a medium to hard. That's at least what Verstappen ran in 2023. Norris went for a medium, hard. Depends on how your tire degradation is. The McLaren was very strong here, but there were a couple of reasons as to why Norris was not ever able to even get a chance at Verstappen, and the Red Bull car is going to be pretty strong here. We know with high speed, they've always been a very good car in all of these floor regulations. Let's go over a lap in Suzuka. Starting with the main straight going into turn 1. What this always reminds me of is what I think was the best overtake in 2022. It's a debate between this one or the Vettel overtake in USA. That turn 1 overtake in the wet on Leclerc was just a thing of beauty. It looked beautiful. It required balls of steel to go into that corner, being that wet on intermediate tires. It was a Max Verstappen masterclass right there, and as I would say, a chef's kiss. But that brings us into turns 2, 3, 4, all the way down to 7, which brings probably the most beautiful part of the track that we have, and some people call this the best sector we have on the whole entire F1 calendar. It is the S sector in Japan. Speeds here are quick, they're all high-speed corners, but it is driver dependent that you nail these parts of the circuit. I think Mercedes is going to have a very tough time here. They did last year. Aston was pretty bad here last year as well. This can make up your whole lap pretty much if you can't nail this as sector. But after that sector, you got a little bit of a straight going into turns 8, 9, and now this is leading us into sector 2. Turns 8 and 9 can be a bit tough on the tires, and nailing them is a bit tricky. Then we're back off onto the straight going into turns 10 and 11, where we're going to hit a hard hairpin. This is a tricky braking zone, and we did have Perez last year go into K-Mag here. It's a tough zone to overtake in. Are the possibilities there? Yes, especially if it's wet, people will go for that overtake because the lines can open up there. But then we go into a flat out section, which is 12. It is a corner, but it's pretty much all flat out. Then going into Spoon, which is 13 and 14. I would say this is one of the trickiest corners to hit, at least to me it feels like it when I'm playing the game. And it seems like drivers always have a tricky time at nailing 13 and 14 because the exit has to be prioritized here because of that huge long straight, which leads into sector 3 from sector 2. And then we get into the most notorious corner, which I would probably say in Formula 1 history pretty much, is 130R. Just the name itself sounds sick, but the actual corner itself isn't much of a corner anymore. As I said, when Alonso got that beautiful overtake on Michael, back then you actually had to lift going into that. It felt like a corner, but now flat out, pedal to the metal, you're going into that last chicane of 16 and 17, going into 18, finishing off the lap. 16 and 17 can be a very tricky corner to nail, and it depends on car characteristics as to how you're going to really get into this corner and if the exit is more prioritized than the entry. That's the track layout. Let's go over my predictions for this race. So as I said, we're going to go over best teams, worst teams, and then my top 5. As for the best teams, Red Bull is always going to be the number 1 team as of right now, but there has been an inching challenger. Now, in Australia, we saw that there were 2 teams that probably could have competed with the Red Bull, with Max Verstappen to be specific. I'm actually going to say McLaren will be the stronger car here in Japan. I think this track layout is ideal for that car. This in Qatar is pretty much the McLaren dream with their car concept as of currently, and I do believe they will be second, but in third will be Ferrari, and I really think it's going to be close. Between those 3 teams, let's see if Max pulls away. I do think Max is going to have a good time here. But the 3 teams will be pretty close, and McLaren and Ferrari are going to be very, very, very close. It really depends on how that Ferrari car has been set up now. There are upgrades coming to the car, so they could possibly be faster than McLaren, maybe even inching up to Max. As for the worst teams here, the most obvious one is Alpine. Thing's a boat, it understeers. This is the worst track to be understeering and be a boat on. So from what we've seen, Sauber is also a pretty weak car. They were strong in Australia. They were looking towards points. But I'm going to say here they're going to be weak again, just because of the problems they've been having. They're still working on the car. They do have upgrades coming. Hopefully those suit them a lot better than what's been happening. And Williams is unfortunately going to be in those top 3 worst teams again. The Haas car has been quite impressive. It was good in Australia, Bahrain, and Saudi. They might even score points again if somebody out of the top 5 gets out. Let's go over my top 5 drivers, starting from 5 to 1. As for the drivers that I think are going to inch into the top 5, I'm going to tell you right now, I think the 3 best teams are going to hold all these spots. I just think those cars are much better than the other 2. I think Mercedes and Aston will struggle a bit here. Even with upgrades for the Aston, we'll have to see. So in 5, I'm actually going to put Perez. It's not a track that I think really suits his driving style. It's a more open track. The way you go into certain corners doesn't really suit his style. And even in previous years, it wasn't something that he was great at. And I think now with the cars inching even closer to Red Bull, it's not going to be his strongest suit. In P4, I'm actually going to put Leclerc. I think Leclerc has started off pretty good. I do think Carlos is the more dominant one out of the 2 of them right now. Do I think Leclerc is the fastest driver overall? I do think so, but it's a very, very close battle between the 2 of them. I do think Carlos is going to inch him here, but I don't have Carlos at P3. At P3, I got Oscar. I think Oscar is going to be the faster driver here. Out of him and Lando, I think Lando is going to be P6. It's going to be a very close race between all those drivers. But Oscar last year in qualifying beat him. His first time in Japan, he beat him. I think in the race, he's been improving a little bit. I think people are over-exaggerating how much he's been improving. Lando is still the stronger race-paced driver, but I feel like this is going to be a more suited track towards Oscar and his style. That's why I have him in P3, and I think Carlos is going to take P2 again. And for Max, my prediction is it's going to be a 25-second victory. I'm sorry to say, he's going to be a mean machine here. We know how it was last time before Japan, when in Singapore he didn't end up winning the race. I think the same thing's going to happen. Japan is just a Max Verstappen type of track. It's like Spa as well. Those 2 tracks for him are just, He's beautiful on this track, and it just suits his style so well. These tracks that are made for Formula One are what Max Verstappen strives in. So I believe a P1 for Max Verstappen. I do think it's going to be a fun race overall. Weather will depend on whether the race will be closer towards the back. If it's wet, I don't think Max is losing. Yet again, a beast in the wet unless somebody crashes him out. So we'll have to see what happens. These are my predictions and the track preview for the Japanese Grand Prix. I'm quite excited, even though it starts at like 1 or 2 a.m. for me. Doesn't matter. It's worth the watch. Hope you guys enjoy the video. Please leave a like, subscribe, and me in the world, and peace.